14 tanks, 22 infantry fighting vehicles, over 600 Russian soldiers, $300 million in Soviet and modern armor, rolling through open farmland at dawn. By 8:30 a.m., 11 of those vehicles were burning. 3 more belonged to Ukraine, and the Pokrovsk corridor, Russia's most ambitious armored thrust of 2026, was finished before breakfast. This is how 60 cheap drones dismantled an entire armored assault in under 4 hours. I'm your host at Ukraine Signal, where we analyze the battles that change wars. And this one, the Battle of the Pokrovsk Corridor, March 15, 2026, might be the most lopsided armored engagement of the entire conflict. Not because of superior firepower, not because of air superiority, but because Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade turned a flat agricultural corridor into a precision kill zone using weapons that cost less than a used car. Let me walk you through every minute. To understand why Russia sent 14 tanks into what became a graveyard, you need to understand what Pokrovsk means. This city sits at a critical junction in Donetsk Oblast. The H-15 highway runs through it, connecting Ukrainian supply lines running north and south along the eastern front. Whoever controls Pokrovsk controls logistics for an entire sector. For months, Russian generals had been probing the approaches, testing Ukrainian defenses, looking for a seam. By early March 2026, Russian intelligence, or what passes for intelligence in the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division, believed they had found one. Satellite imagery and ground reconnaissance suggested a gap between 2 Ukrainian brigade sectors northeast of Pokrovsk, a boundary seam. In military doctrine, boundary seams between units are gold. Communication is slower. Responsibility is shared, which means it's diluted. Fields of fire may overlap poorly. If you can identify a seam and hit it fast enough, you can punch through before either unit reacts effectively. Russian command at the corps level approved an exploitation attack. The plan was straightforward in that Soviet way. Mass armor at the seam, punch through at first light, cut the H-15 highway east of Pokrovsk, and isolate the city's eastern approaches. Classic deep battle theory adapted for a modern corridor. The force package was significant. 14 main battle tanks, a mix of T-72B3M variants, and at least 2 T-90M Pro-Riv tanks, supported by 22 BMP-2 and BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles carrying dismounted infantry, plus several Ural trucks with additional troops and ammunition. Total force, roughly 600 personnel, organized into 2 battalion tactical groups operating under a single regimental command from the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division. This division has history. It fought at Stalingrad. It rolled into Prague in 1968. It deployed to Afghanistan. Now, it was rolling toward Pokrovsk through flat winter farmland, expecting to write another chapter. Instead, it wrote an obituary. Which weapon proved deadliest in this engagement? Was it A, HIMARS precision rockets, B, massed artillery, or C, FPV kamikaze drones? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll reveal the answer at the end. The Russian assembly area was located approximately 18 kilometers northeast of Pokrovsk, in a cluster of farm buildings and tree lines near the village of Hrodivka. Armor began staging there around 2 a.m. on March 15th, engines running in the pre-dawn cold. Crews performed final checks. Commanders reviewed approach routes on tablet screens showing terrain maps. They thought they were invisible. They were wrong by about 2 hours. At 4:30 a.m., a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone, a modified Leleka 100 operating at altitude, picked up thermal signatures consistent with massed armor. The feed went directly to the 47th Mechanized Brigade's Tactical Operations Center, where intelligence officers began counting vehicles. 14 heavy thermal blooms, tanks, 22 medium signatures, BMPs, multiple smaller returns, trucks, command vehicles, logistics. The brigade commander was woken immediately. By 4:45 a.m., he was staring at a real-time drone feed showing the largest Russian armored assembly his sector had seen in months. The decision tree was simple but critical. He could request corps-level fire support, HIMARS, heavy artillery, but that would take time to coordinate and might not arrive before the column moved. He could engage with organic brigade assets immediately and layer in heavier fires as they became available. He chose the second option, speed over mass. By 5 a.m., the 47th Brigade's drone units received their orders. 4 FPV launch teams, positioned at staggered intervals along the expected Russian axis of advance, began preparing their munitions. Over 60 FPV kamikaze drones were armed and checked. Each drone, a small fast quadcopter carrying an RPG warhead or shaped charge, cost between $400 and $800. Combined, the entire drone arsenal for this engagement cost less than a single T-72 engine replacement. Simultaneously, the brigade requested Bayraktar TB2 Overwatch. 2 Turkish-made reconnaissance and strike drones were already airborne on routine patrol. They repositioned to provide altitude coverage over the corridor, their electro-optical cameras zooming in on the Russian assembly area with crystal clarity from 20,000 feet. Stay with me, because what happens in the next 3 hours destroys an entire armored column and changes Russian operational planning for the rest of March. The terrain the Russians chose for their advance was both their opportunity and their death sentence. The corridor northeast of Pokrovsk is predominantly flat agricultural land, winter fields, some stubble from last year's sunflower crop, scattered tree lines along drainage ditches. The corridor itself is roughly 3 kilometers wide, bounded by a tree line to the north and a shallow ravine system to the south. For armor, flat open ground means speed. Tanks can move fast, spread out, use their range advantage, but flat open ground also means no concealment, no hold-down positions, no urban cover to duck behind when things go wrong. And in 2026, where every square meter of battlefield is watched by something with a camera, open ground is a killing field. The Russian column began moving at approximately 7:15 a.m. First light was breaking over the Donetsk steppe, thin clouds catching orange on the eastern horizon. Lead elements, 2 T-72B3M tanks with mine rollers attached, followed by a pair of BMP-3s carrying sappers, pushed southwest along a dirt track between the fields. Behind them, the main body formed into 2 rough columns, tanks interspersed with BMPs, maintaining roughly 50-meter intervals. From altitude, the Bayraktar operators watched the formation stretch out across nearly 2 kilometers of farmland. One operator later described it as watching ants march toward a magnifying glass. At 7:22 a.m., the lead T-72B3M crossed an invisible line, a pre-designated engagement trigger that the 47th Brigade's drone teams had established during their hasty planning session. Launch Site Alpha, positioned in a tree line 1,400 meters east of the corridor, activated first. The first FPV drone lifted off at 7:23 a.m., then a second, then 4 more in rapid succession. Within 90 seconds, 18 FPV drones were airborne from 2 launch sites, converging on the Russian column from the east and southeast. A T-72B3M weighs 46 tons. Its composite and reactive armor can defeat most conventional anti-tank rounds at range. Its crew of 3 sits behind layered protection designed to stop NATO kinetic penetrators. An FPV kamikaze drone weighs about 2 kilograms. It flies at roughly 120 kilometers per hour. Its operator sees through a headset, guiding the drone with joystick precision toward the weakest points of any armored vehicle: the engine deck, the turret ring, the rear hull where armor is thinnest. The first strike hit the lead tank's engine compartment at 7:25 a.m. The shaped charge punched through the rear deck armor, igniting diesel fuel and hydraulic fluid. The tank lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from its engine bay. The crew bailed within seconds. A small mercy because 16 seconds later, a second FPV drone struck the ammunition storage in the hull, and the T-72's autoloader carousel detonated. The turret launched vertically, spinning, trailing fire. It landed 40 meters from the hull. Classic Jack-in-the-Box effect. The T-72 series' greatest vulnerability: the autoloader ring of propellant charges surrounding the crew compartment. 1 penetration, 1 spark, and 46 tons of steel becomes a volcano. The second and third drones hit BMP-2s in the forward screen. BMP armor is thin, rated to stop heavy machine gun fire, nothing more. The FPV charges went through like paper. Both vehicles burned immediately, their infantry passengers scrambling out of rear hatches into open fields. Now the Russian column faced a fundamental decision. The lead vehicles were destroyed or burning, blocking the forward route. The column could push through, bypass the wrecks, and continue the advance. It could halt and assess, or it could reverse. The column commander, likely a lieutenant colonel operating from a command BMP somewhere in the middle of the formation, chose to push through. He ordered the formation to spread laterally, tanks moving to bypass the burning wrecks on either side. This was exactly what the Ukrainian drone teams wanted. When armor spreads out, it presents more individual targets, each more isolated, each harder to support. And spreading out in a flat corridor with no cover means every vehicle is exposed from every angle. Between 7:28 and 7:41 a.m., 13 minutes, the first wave of 18 FPV drones completed their attacks. Of the 18 launched, 14 found targets. Ukrainian drone operators reported direct hits on 4 tanks and 5 BMPs in this first wave. 3 drones malfunctioned or lost signal. One was shot down by a BMP gunner who spotted it at close range and engaged with his 30mm autocannon, a desperate but effective reaction. The corridor was now chaos. Multiple vehicles burning, ammunition cooking off in staccato explosions, black smoke columns rising into the morning sky, visible for kilometers. Infantry dismounting and running for the shallow ravine to the south, tank crews trying to figure out where the attacks were coming from. How many total armored vehicles did Ukraine destroy or capture in this single engagement? Was it A, 8, B, 11, or C, 14? I'll give you the answer at the end of this breakdown. At 7:35 a.m., the Russian formation attempted something that showed either courage or desperation. Probably both. The remaining operational tanks, roughly 10 of them, formed a rough wedge and accelerated southwest, trying to push through the engagement zone at maximum speed. Tank commanders buttoned up, hatches sealed, relying on their armor to absorb drone strikes while they closed distance toward what they believed were Ukrainian forward positions. Speed is a valid counter-drone tactic. An FPV drone operator needs time to identify a target, line up an approach, and guide the drone to a specific impact point. A tank moving at 50 kilometers per hour across open ground is harder to hit precisely than a stationary one. The Russian tankers understood this. But the 47th Brigade had planned for it. Launch sites Charlie and Delta, positioned further southwest along the corridor closer to Pokrovsk, activated at 7:38 a.m. 22 fresh FPV drones lifted off, joining the remaining drones from the first wave that were still circling, hunting for targets. The second wave hit the accelerating Russian wedge from the front and flanks simultaneously. The lead, T-90M ProRev, the most advanced tank in the formation, equipped with relict explosive reactive armor and the Stora active protection system, took the first drone directly on its turret face. The ERA panel detonated as designed, defeating the shaped charge. The tank kept moving. A second drone hit the same tank 9 seconds later, striking the turret ring where the ERA had already detonated. This time, the charge penetrated. The turret jammed. The T-90M slewed to a halt, its gun frozen at an awkward angle, crew evacuating through the hull escape hatch. Subscribe to Ukraine Signal if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what you're watching isn't just a battle, it's the future of armored combat. This is the reality of reactive armor in the drone age. ERA works once. Each panel defeats one threat. Then it's gone. Against a swarm of cheap drones, each hitting from different angles, even the best protected tank becomes vulnerable after the first or second impact. A $400 drone strips the ERA. The next $400 drone kills the tank. Total cost, $800 to defeat a vehicle worth $4.5 million. By 7:50 a.m., the Russian advance had stalled completely. 7 tanks were burning or immobilized. 9 BMPs were destroyed or abandoned. Infantry squads were scattered across the fields, trying to find cover in drainage ditches and shallow depressions. Some were running northeast, back toward the assembly area. Others were pinned down by the burning vehicles around them. The Bayraktar TB2's overhead continued feeding targeting data to the Brigade Fire Support Coordinator. At 7:52 a.m., Ukrainian M109A3GN self-propelled howitzers, 155mm guns positioned 8 kilometers behind the front, opened fire with airburst rounds. These shells detonate 20 to 30 meters above the ground, spraying shrapnel downward over a wide area. Against dismounted infantry in the open, airburst is devastating. The first salvo of 6 rounds landed among the infantry squads attempting to regroup near the southern ravine. Survivors describe the sound as a continuous crack. Not the boom of impact, but the sharp snap of shells detonating overhead, followed by the whistle of steel fragments cutting through air and flesh. Russian forces had no effective counter-battery radar in this sector. Their own artillery, staged further back near Hrdivka, began firing blindly towards suspected Ukrainian positions. 152mm shells from two S-19 Mesta howitzers impacting an empty field southeast of the corridor. Without drone reconnaissance of their own, their Orlan-10 UAVs had been jammed by Ukrainian electronic warfare units. Russian gunners were shooting at map coordinates, not observed targets. At 8:05 a.m., the Russian column commander ordered a general retreat. This was communicated via radio and intercepted by Ukrainian signals intelligence. The transmission, later released in redacted form by Ukrainian military sources, captured the moment clearly. The commander's voice was strained, background noise of explosions audible. Withdrawal to start point. All units reverse. We have no corridor. No corridor. The irony was precise. The Pokrovsk corridor, the gap they were supposed to exploit, had become their cage. The retreat was worse than the advance. Vehicles attempting to reverse along the dirt tracks created traffic jams. A T-72B3M attempting a three-point turn on soft ground through a track and was immediately abandoned by its crew. Two BMPs collided at low speed as drivers, visibility restricted by hatches and smoke, tried to navigate around burning wrecks. Ukrainian drone operators, now operating with near-complete freedom, picked off retreating vehicles methodically. Between 8:05 and 8:30 a.m., 4 more armored vehicles were struck. 2 BMPs destroyed, 1 T-72B3M immobilized by a drone strike to its running gear, and 1 Ural ammunition truck that detonated spectacularly when an FPV drone hit its cargo bed. The truck's explosion was visible from Pokrovsk itself, a black and orange mushroom cloud that briefly silhouetted the entire corridor in sharp relief. If you believe tactics win wars, not just numbers, type Ukraine signal in the comments, because this battle proves it. By 8:30 a.m., the engagement was effectively over. The Russian 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division's exploitation attack, planned for days, resourced with some of the best armor available, commanded by officers who believed they had found a weakness, had lasted 1 hour and 15 minutes from first contact to full retreat. The butcher's bill was extraordinary. 11 armored vehicles confirmed destroyed. 4 T-72B3M tanks, catastrophic kills, turrets blown off, or hulls burned out completely. 1 T-90M Proriv, immobilized and abandoned, later recovered by Ukrainian forces. 6 BMP-2 and BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, all burned. 2 logistics trucks destroyed, including the ammunition carrier. 3 additional T-72B3Ms were abandoned intact during the retreat. Their crews, rattled by the drone attacks and unable to determine safe withdrawal routes, simply dismounted and fled on foot. Ukrainian recovery teams from the 47th Brigade moved into the corridor under drone overwatch that afternoon and dragged all 3 tanks back to their own lines using MTLB tractors. 3 captured T-72B3Ms in a single engagement. This represented one of the largest single battle tank captures of 2026. Each tank, once inspected and repaired, would be turned against its former owners, repainted with Ukrainian crosses, and integrated into reserve formations. The poetic justice was not lost on anyone. Personnel losses were harder to confirm precisely. Ukrainian sources estimated between 100 and 140 Russian soldiers killed or seriously wounded, with an additional 30 to 40 captured in the days following the engagement as scattered survivors were rounded up by Ukrainian infantry patrols. Some Russian soldiers had hidden in drainage ditches and farm outbuildings, waiting for darkness to attempt escape. Most were found by thermal-equipped drones before nightfall. The total estimated value of Russian equipment destroyed or captured in the Pokrovsk corridor engagement, approximately $270 million. The total cost of Ukrainian FPV drones expended, roughly $32,000. The cost ratio, equipment destroyed versus munitions expended, was approximately 8,000 to 1. Let that number settle, 8,000 to 1. This is the fundamental equation of drone warfare in 2026, and it is an equation that breaks conventional armored doctrine completely. No military budget can sustain attrition at those ratios. No factory production line can replace tanks faster than $400 drones can destroy them. What would NATO have done differently in this scenario? Would a Western armored force have fared better against drone swarms? Comment your analysis below. Now let me break down the tactical decisions that made this outcome inevitable. First, Russian intelligence failure. The gap between Ukrainian brigade sectors was real, Boundaries between units are always seams, but the 47th Brigade had specifically planned for this vulnerability. Drone reconnaissance teams maintained 24-hour overwatch of the boundary area precisely because they knew it was a target. The gap existed on paper. In practice, it was the most heavily surveilled piece of terrain in the sector. Second, terrain selection. The agricultural corridor offered speed, but zero survivability. Russian planners chose the corridor because armor moves fastest on flat ground. But in doing so, they committed their most expensive assets to terrain where concealment was impossible. Every meter of that corridor was observable from altitude, and Ukrainian drone teams had pre-designated engagement zones with range markers and approach vectors already planned. Third, formation density. 14 tanks and 22 BMPs in a 3-kilometer corridor is dense by modern standards. The vehicles maintained 50-meter intervals, tight enough that a single drone operator could shift between multiple targets without repositioning. Dispersal would have made each vehicle harder to engage, but would have slowed the advance and complicated command and control. Russian doctrine still favors concentrated force, a legacy of Soviet deep battle theory that assumes losses can be absorbed if mass is sufficient. In 2026, mass is not sufficient. Mass is a target. Fourth, counter-drone capability, or rather, the absence of it. The Russian formation had no dedicated counter-UAS systems, no vehicle-mounted jammers, no short-range air defense specifically tasked with engaging small drones. The only drone kill during the engagement came from a BMP gunner, who visually spotted an incoming FPV and engaged with his autocannon, a reactive individual response, not a systematic defense. Russian forces have been working on counter-drone solutions throughout the war. Electronic warfare systems like the Pol-21 and vehicle-mounted jammers have shown some effectiveness. But the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division in this engagement either lacked these systems or failed to deploy them. This suggests either equipment shortages at the divisional level or a command failure in tactical planning. Fifth, and this is the factor that rarely gets discussed, Ukrainian crew proficiency. The 60-plus FPV drone operators who executed this engagement were not amateurs flying hobby quadcopters. These were trained specialists, many with months of continuous combat experience, who had practiced coordinated swarm attacks against moving armor repeatedly. Their strike rate, 14 hits from 18 drones in the first wave, roughly 78%, reflects skill levels that take time and combat exposure to develop. Ukraine has invested heavily in drone operator training throughout 2025 and into 2026. Dedicated schools turn out hundreds of qualified operators monthly. Veterans from earlier phases of the war serve as instructors, passing down hard-won techniques, approach angles that minimize ERA effectiveness, timing patterns that overwhelm crew reaction time, target prioritization that disables formation cohesion before destroying individual vehicles. Each FPV operator in the 47th Brigade's drone units has a personal kill count. Some have destroyed more armored vehicles than entire tank platoons. They are the modern equivalent of fighter aces, individuals whose individual skill multiplies the combat power of their entire formation by orders of magnitude. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. And in the Pokrovsk corridor, that innovation was on full display. The aftermath of March 15th rippled outward through Russian operational planning immediately. Within 48 hours, the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division pulled back its remaining armor from forward staging areas, dispersing tanks and BMPs into individual revetments spread across a wide area to reduce their vulnerability to drone surveillance. More significantly, Russian Corps Command abandoned the Pokrovsk corridor as an axis of advance for the remainder of March 2026. The forces that had been allocated for the exploitation attack were redirected south, towards sectors where terrain offered more cover, built-up areas, industrial zones, forested ravines. These sectors were less strategically valuable than the Pokrovsk approach, but Russian command apparently concluded that repeating the corridor attack with the same force structure would produce the same result. This is the strategic impact that doesn't show up in vehicle kill counts. When a single failed engagement forces an entire corps to redirect its main effort, the defending force has achieved something more valuable than destroying tanks. It has shaped the enemy's decision-making. The 47th Brigade's drone operators didn't just burn 11 vehicles. They made the Pokrovsk corridor psychologically impassable for Russian armor. Intercepted communications from the following days paint a picture of institutional shock within the 2nd Guards Division. Junior officers questioning the competence of planning staff. Tank crews refusing to advance without confirmed counter-drone support. A battalion commander requesting transfer to a rear area logistics unit. These fragments, collected by Ukrainian signals intelligence and partially released to media, suggest that the Pokrovsk corridor engagement damaged Russian unit cohesion in ways that extended far beyond the material losses. Ukrainian General Staff reports released in the week following the engagement confirmed the destruction figures and highlighted the captured tanks as a particular success. Combat footage, compiled from FPV drone cameras, Bayraktar feeds, and ground-level video, was edited and released through official channels, showing the systematic dismantling of the Russian column from multiple perspectives. The footage went viral across military analysis communities, accumulating millions of views and prompting intense debate about the future viability of main battle tanks in drone-saturated battlefields. OSINT analysts geolocated the engagement area within hours of the footage release, confirming the corridor location and matching burned vehicle positions to satellite imagery captured later that day. Independent verification supported Ukrainian claims of 11 destroyed vehicles and 3 captured. So here's the answer to the question I asked earlier. How many total armored vehicles did Ukraine destroy or capture? The answer is C, 14. 11 destroyed in the engagement and 3 captured intact during recovery operations. Some of you probably guessed 11, the number destroyed. But the 3 captured tanks matter just as much. Every captured T-72 that fights under a Ukrainian flag is a tank Russia has to destroy twice, once to lose it and once to face it again. Real tactics, real consequences. Ukraine's signal. Let me leave you with the broader lessons. The Pokrovsk corridor engagement was not an anomaly. It was a demonstration of a new combat reality that has been building since the earliest days of this war. Armored forces operating without effective counter-drone protection in terrain that denies concealment against an opponent with trained drone operators and sufficient FPV munitions will be destroyed. This is not theoretical. This is observed, repeated, documented fact. The cost equation is the core of it. A modern main battle tank costs between $3 and $5 million. It requires months to manufacture, a trained crew of 3 or 4, extensive logistics support, and maintenance infrastructure. An FPV kamikaze drone costs $400 to $800. It can be assembled from commercial components in days. Its operator can be trained to basic proficiency in weeks. When the cheaper weapon consistently defeats the expensive one, military doctrine must adapt or become obsolete. Russia has not yet adapted. Their continued reliance on massed armor in open terrain, a doctrine inherited from the Soviet era and reinforced by decades of institutional inertia, produces engagements like the Pokrovsk corridor with predictable regularity. Ukraine, by contrast, has adapted faster than any military in modern history. Drone warfare doctrine that didn't exist 3 years ago is now integrated at every level of command. Innovation cycles that would take NATO armies years to implement are completed in weeks on the Ukrainian front. The 47th Mechanized Brigade's layered drone defense, reconnaissance drones for detection, Bayraktars for overwatch, FPV swarms for engagement, artillery for exploitation, represents a combined arms approach that is genuinely new in military history. 3 questions to consider. Was the Russian decision to advance through open agricultural terrain a planning failure? Or were they forced into it by the lack of better options? Could the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division have prevented this outcome with better counter-drone equipment and tactics? And what would you have done differently, as the Russian commander, or as the Ukrainian brigade commander who turned 60 cheap drones into a decisive victory? Drop your analysis in the comments. I read everyone. Subscribe to Ukraine Signal, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The Pokrovsk corridor is quiet now. Farmers will eventually return to those fields. But for now, the wrecks remain. Blackened hulls half sunken in the soft earth. Turrets resting where they landed. Tread marks that lead nowhere. Silent monuments to the morning when 14 tanks rolled into a 3-kilometer corridor and modern warfare answered with 60 drones, $32,000, and 1 hour and 15 minutes. Stay vigilant.